Allora, buongiorno a tutti e a tutte e benvenuti a questo importante evento che, che ho organizzato con il professor Pleyers. Prima di introdurlo vorrei dare la parola per i saluti istituzionali al rettore dell'Università Marconi, il professor Abate, e al direttore del Dipartimento di Scienze Umane, il professor Alfieri.
Buongiorno a tutti, welcome to everybody. Grazie per essere qui in questo incontro, secondo me molto interessante e molto importante, che è stato organizzato dal professor Toscano, che ringrazio. Come Università Marconi siamo molto interessati a mantenere vive tutte e tre le missioni dell'università, partendo ovviamente dalla didattica, che è il motivo per cui siamo nati, però anche la didattica, il modo con cui affrontiamo la didattica come Università Marconi ha un contatto diretto con la terza missione, perché il nostro obiettivo, il nostro motivo d'essere è quello di far accedere, di dare la possibilità di avere una formazione universitaria di qualità a tutti coloro che per qualsiasi motivo non ne hanno accesso con le università usuali. Quindi è un tipo di intervento prettamente sociale sul territorio, sulla società e simili, che ricade dentro la terza missione. E per fare bene questo lavoro deve essere fatta bene anche la ricerca e devono essere mantenuti, ed è importante avere contatti ad alto livello internazionali con i punti più avanzati della ricerca in tutti i campi in cui ci impegniamo. Quindi da questo punto di vista sono veramente orgoglioso di poter ospitare il professor Pleyers, which I thank for having accepted our invitation, che è il presidente dell'International Sociology Association, quindi una figura di rilievo decisamente internazionale, e ho anche il piacere di ringraziare per essere qui con noi il dottor Daniele Di Nunzio, in rappresentanza della parte ricerca della Fondazione di Vittorio, mostrando di nuovo come riusciamo a mettere insieme tutti e tre gli aspetti, e non a caso concretizzati anche da una significativa presenza di dottorandi, che è il momento della formazione in cui didattica e ricerca si mescolano e vanno avanti. Quindi ringrazio davvero di cuore tutti quanti per l'organizzazione. I have just one final comment, but I do in English because it has something to do with English. Well, I am a mathematician. So when I read the title of this talk, I thought, well, clearly there is a misprint. It should be linear, not lineal. And then I saw it repeated many times. I decided, no, it's not a misprint. It must mean something. And I'm very sorry that I have to leave very soon, but afterwards you have to explain me what lineal means. So, thank you everybody, and I thank you. Grazie anche alle persone che sono collegate a distanza, e vi auguro un'ottima mattina.
Grazie mille, grazie al rettore professor Abate. Io passerei la parola al professor Alfieri per...
Io mi associo volentierissimo ai ringraziamenti che ha fatto il nostro magnifico rettore, quindi un ringraziamento particolare al professor Pleyers. Thank you, Geoffrey, for being here. We really appreciate your presence here. Un ringraziamento anche a Emanuele Toscano, che ci ha aiutato e ha consentito che questa occasione si realizzasse. Una riflessione dal punto di vista strettamente dipartimentale che ci tengo a fare qui riguarda proprio i livelli di internazionalizzazione, nel senso che il nostro Dipartimento ha come obiettivo per il prossimo futuro, almeno io credo, quello di cercare di presentarsi sul piano internazionale in una maniera un pochino più forte di quello che siamo riusciti a fare fino adesso. No, noi abbiamo mostrato in questi anni una certa capacità, diciamo così, di aggredire fondi di ricerca di livello nazionale in maniera tutto sommato efficace rispetto alla popolazione che ci compone. È vero che i nostri livelli di internazionalizzazione sono più bassi di quello che noi avremmo voluto, quindi diciamo così, dal mio punto di vista uno degli obiettivi importanti dei prossimi anni per il Dipartimento è proprio quello di cercare di rilanciare la nostra presenza sul piano internazionale in una maniera un pochino più forte. Ecco, in questa linea la possibilità di ospitare una figura così di spicco rispetto al panorama della sociologia internazionale, globale, per noi è un grande piacere, ci fa, come dire, molto, ci fa bene, no? E certamente conferma quella particolarità che la Marconi, diciamo, se dal mio punto di vista è sempre stata e sempre più sta diventando. Cioè, certamente le università telematiche hanno nella didattica la loro prima vocazione, un pochino tutte, però rispetto alle altre università telematiche noi ci siamo, come dire, orgogliosi di mantenere dei livelli di ricerca che siano, come dire, con un'asticella un pochino più alta, no? Rispetto ai nostri competitor noi possiamo offrire un contatto più diretto tra la didattica, la ricerca e la terza missione. Questo è un valore aggiunto importante ed è un valore aggiunto importante che qui, come dire, oggi proprio in questa occasione manifestiamo. Un'ultima cosa, so among your research interests I read there's social movements in the global era, and I'm particularly pleased, I mean, I can share with you strange feelings which I have experienced in the last 20, I guess, years. So a sort of disorientation as a man in the global era. And looking at the social movements, I have often felt this sensation of being disoriented in how the new movements are going to be formalized, structured, how can I understand them. I experience on my skin the difficulty in finding an orientation map for, orientating myself in the global era. And I really hope that your lesson today will help me in find the key for entering the global scene. So, thank you very much for being here.
Grazie mille anche a Luca e io ovviamente ringrazio sia il Rettore sia Luca per le parole che hanno speso per introdurre la mattinata. Ringrazio ovviamente anche i tecnici che ci permettono di realizzare il collegamento e l'evento in streaming e ringrazio soprattutto Geoffrey. Questo perché? Diciamo, io sono legato a Geoffrey da un'amicizia di lunga data, noi abbiamo svolto il nostro dottorato insieme a Parigi all'École d'Institut en Sciences Sociales presso il CADIS, che è il centro di ricerca fondato da Alain Touraine, e abbiamo avuto lo stesso direttore di tesi, il professor Viviorca, che è stato qui da noi qualche tempo fa, ospite dell'Università Marconi. E ovviamente io sono estremamente onorato di avere una figura come quella di Geoffrey nella nostra università, una figura così importante per la sociologia globale. Il presidente dell'International Sociological Association, che è l'associazione più importante per i sociologi accademici, fondata nel 1949 sotto l'egida dell'UNESCO e che oggi conta più di 6.000 iscritti in tutto il mondo. Geoffrey è il professor Pleyers, è professore di sociologia, oltre ad essere il presidente dell'International Sociological Association, è anche professore di sociologia all'Università Louvain-la-Neuve in Belgio, ma è anche un ricercatore riconosciuto a livello globale per i suoi lavori sui movimenti sociali, movimenti ambientalisti, movimenti indigeni, e diciamo anche per le sue riflessioni sulla teoria sociale. E è stato visiting professor un po' ovunque nel mondo, a partire dalla London School of Economics, ma anche a New York, in Ecuador, in Cile, insomma in tantissimi posti. Però prima di lasciare la parola a Geoffrey vorrei mettere in evidenza alcuni aspetti della sua sociologia per introdurlo a chi magari non la conosce così bene. Credo di poter, diciamo, concentrarmi su 3 aspetti principali. Il primo aspetto è sicuramente la estesissima portata della sua ricerca sul campo, che ha svolto in praticamente tutti i continenti, ha lavorato in Europa, in Sud America, negli Stati Uniti, in Africa, e questo lo rende, giustamente come lui stesso si definisce, un vero sociologo globale. L'altro aspetto che secondo me è importante sottolineare è l'originalità del contributo teorico che Geoffrey ci propone, a partire, diciamo, dal suo primo libro Alter Globalization, Being an Actor in the Global Age, che è stato pubblicato nel 2011. Geoffrey diciamo, sottolinea la necessità di superare le letture dicotomiche che caratterizzano lo studio dei movimenti sociali e provare a, diciamo, sottolineare alcuni aspetti, quindi andando oltre l'idea di riforma-rivoluzione, struttura, attore sociale, unità, eterogeneità, se vogliamo, ma ragiona su categorie quali per esempio la dimensione soggettiva degli attori sociali che animano i movimenti da un lato, ma dall'altro ne riconosce anche la fondamentale portata di expertise che questi attori hanno. Altra questione che secondo me è importante sottolineare è l'estendere questa lettura non lineare anche ad altri aspetti nello studio dei movimenti sociali, quali ad esempio i movimenti di estrema destra o comunque movimenti conservatori. Questa, diciamo, necessità di andare oltre una lettura lineare dello studio dei movimenti sociali è appunto l'oggetto della lezione, ma è anche il titolo di uno dei suoi ultimi lavori, che è El cambio nunca es lineal, movimento sociales in tiempos polarizados. L'altra questione che è relativa all'aspetto, diciamo, teorico-interpretativo dei movimenti sociali è l'analisi che Geoffrey mette sul tavolo rispetto ai movimenti sociali come produttori della società. Questo tipo di lettura ovviamente non è una lettura originale, nel senso che si iscrive all'interno di un'interpretazione più ampia che viene da Alan Turing, che appunto è stato il fondatore del CADIS, il posto dove noi abbiamo fatto il dottorato. Ma la cosa interessante che secondo me Geoffrey è riuscito a fare è di estendere questa lettura, come dicevo, anche ai movimenti non necessariamente progressisti. Quello che ci dice Geoffrey è che anche i movimenti diciamo, di destra radicale contribuiscono a produrre la realtà sociale in cui agiscono e contestarla ed eventualmente metterla in discussione, come peraltro, diciamo, vediamo in un periodo come quello di oggi in diverse parti del mondo. Infine, il terzo elemento che volevo sottolineare nella sociologia di Geoffrey è la sua attenzione per la portata globale della sociologia e l'attenzione nei confronti di una sociologia pubblica. che sappiamo essere un termine proprio diciamo, della sociologia americana, perché la sociologia di fatto dovrebbe avere questa diciamo, tensione all'intervenire sul contesti che punta ad analizzare. Geoffrey di fatto si è fatto carico del diffondere i messaggi e l'importanza della sociologia pubblica, concetto che è stato diciamo, lanciato da Michael Borroway, che è stato presidente dell'International Sociological Association qualche anno fa e che purtroppo è venuto a mancare a febbraio di quest'anno in una maniera estremamente tragica, e Geoffrey ne ha, diciamo, giustamente riconosciuto il merito e in qualche modo si è fatto carico del diffondere l'idea di una sociologia pubblica il più possibile. L'idea di questa sociologia pubblica, di una sociologia globale, è a mio avviso, come ho detto, un elemento centrale della sociologia di Geoffrey, il cui merito, a mio avviso, è quello di essere riuscito a portare sullo studio dei movimenti sociali questa prospettiva di global studies. Infine, prima di lasciarvi insomma, al nostro ospite, ci tengo a sottolineare che questo ragionamento sulla sociologia pubblica in Geoffrey non è solo una speculazione teorica, perché va detto che la maggior parte dei suoi lavori, dei suoi scritti, dei libri dei volumi da lui curati, sono tutti accessibili in open access. E questo credo che sia una, diciamo, traduzione reale di quello che poi è il messaggio di una sociologia pubblica capace di intervenire nel dibattito pubblico e di essere accessibile a chiunque. Quindi non vi voglio ulteriormente tediare, ovviamente il professor Pleyers, Geoffrey farà la sua relazione in inglese. Daniele si occuperà, diciamo, avrà l'ingrato compito poi di gestire la fase di discussant. Se avete delle domande e volete farle in italiano, sia io che Daniele possiamo, insomma, tradurle se necessario. Quindi thank you very much, Geoffrey, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Emanuele. Well, such an honor to be here, and thank you very much to the director, to the director of the department. And of course, always an honor to be introduced by my friends, Emanuele, and I'm so happy also and honored to be here with Daniele, Andrea. Emanuele was so much involved in the ISA, the International Sociological Association. That's important. If we believe that sociology has an impact, if we believe that sociology is important globally, if we believe that we have to learn something from different countries, from the global south and global north, well, we need people to make it happen. And definitely these three are some of the people who are always not on the first floor showing what they do, but doing real work in the ISA, and this is so important to ISA, and any organization of sociology doesn't exist without the work of people like these three fantastic sociologists. So thank you for that. And after Emanuele, of course, it's more difficult to talk and I'm a bit lost in translation. I'm sorry I don't speak Italian. I understand it quite well, but I come here to present a book in Spanish. I present in English in Italy, so sorry about that. But today, yes, I thank very much Emanuele for stressing the kind of global dimension of sociology. For sure, for me, it's important, but it is more than important. It's at the core of my sociology. Before I go to the book, I would just say what lies a bit behind it as a perspective, and it's also actually the last chapter of the book about the global sociology of social movements. Global sociology, I think too often we see it as something very far away, and you need to understand every country on earth to do global sociology. I think that global sociology is complex, but it's also something easy. It's an opening, a personal opening to the other, to try to understand things differently. And I would take, for example, the African philosopher Akil Mbembe, who says that you have to be ready to change yourself in this kind of dialogue. And so, of course, I'm not an expert of every country on earth. But yes, I do talk with colleagues in many countries. And I did most of my research in the past, maybe 10 years or 15, in Latin America. So for this book, in this occasion, I draw mostly on my research on social movements in Brazil and in Chile, mostly, not only. And also, well, my sociology most of the time, yes, I start by question I have. And of course, I never have full answer, but I try to answer them. As many of you, I guess, I hope, we had some enthusiasm in 2011 when we saw a global wave of movements everywhere. Of course, the Arab world, we saw it in Spain, we saw it in Latin America, we saw it everywhere. Even including 2019, there were still mass protests everywhere. In 2011, I really believed that we were going towards a more democratic world. And most people believe that, I think, I hope. Well, in 2017, I wrote a book that was actually much more about the structure of movements, about the way they organize, alter activism. And 2017, even in the first years of the first Trump mandate, there was still some, we say, okay, it's Trump, a few problems, but still we may go towards a more democratic world. Well, today, it's more difficult to believe. And of course, in Italy, you know more about it. You managed to have one of the most fantastic global justice movements analyzed by not only by Daniele and Emanuele, and at the same time Berlusconi. And of course, now you have the far right, once again here. Before, you had it in power, this very important book on Casapont was also written here with all the far right didn't start all of a sudden when they were with Salvini, of course not. Anyway, but so we face a question as social movement scholars. I started working on social movement in 1999 with a movement in Seattle against the World Trade Organization. And now we say, is it still helpful? Does it still matter? I mean, we saw social movement in so many different countries, and here we are in the Trump world with social media, including I would extend it to sociology. Does sociology still matter in a world where we see that any fake news on X seems to have more impact than a solid research? Well, this is a complex question. And I would also say even, so let's go to the next one. So this is the point of the book. I think that, of course, I cannot say I'm a social movement scholar. I will never say social movement don't matter. Of course, you know it. But still, I believe that it led me to bring a bit more of complexity between on some of the perspective, notably on social change, on social movements, and I would also say on the crisis. I became a bit, we have to understand social movements today and the role we need to give up illusions of a simple linear relationship between crisis and social change, between social movements action, political change, and social change. This is much more complex than we think often. So of course you have all the theories, the outcomes of social movements and many, many books, but we still, I think most of us, everyone at some point, fell in this trap. Notably one is the belief in the crisis. They think that after the crisis everything will be better. This is something that seems to be very normal, and I think it's very anti-sociological. Anyway, we have to rethink a bit, which is why I have here, if I'm not wrong, 2 or 3, I don't know, 3 theses on crisis and social change, and then 5 theses on social movements, drawing on some articles here. But one on social change, which is never linear, I think we have to tame the initial enthusiasm we, or many of us, have when we see effervescent stages of movements. You know, when there are this mass protest, dozens of thousands of people on the street who wants more democracy, who wants a fairer world, who wants more a greener world. Of course, I said at the beginning, we should be enthusiastic. It's okay. I mean, we are part of that, and most of us, we like this movement, good. But we should also be a bit more careful. I don't know how it is in Italy, actually, but I take the case of Chile. In Chile, there was a massive student movement in 2011. The movement was still going on. Students were still in the street. There was already a political scientist who had a book with the title, The End of the model. So the movement had already succeeded in destroying the model in Chile. It used to be a neoliberal country. After the movement, it was over. Come on. The movement was still in the street, but the political scientists already knew that everything had changed. Well, the problem is, the movement had some impact. But 5 years afterwards, the Chilean people, we elected the neoliberal president, that was also the richest man of Chile. And so the same person tend to say, okay, the movement were useless, we should go to different form of mobilizing. They always say we should go to more political power, things like that. The same person who wrote this book, The End of the Model, when there was this massive movement in 2019 in Chile, it was a huge movement, millions and millions of Chileans in the streets. Then again, the same person wrote a book with a very similar title, like, now it's really the end of the model. Well, what happened afterwards? Of course, in Chile, they managed to have the youngest president elected, left-wing president, I think quite a, not super left, let's say, but a very fair president. And they started a process to revise the constitution, to write a new constitution, because the current constitution is still the constitution from written under Pinochet dictatorship, during the dictatorship. Still, they managed that. But then, after a few years, the constituency to write this new constitution was, on the second election, the far right won the elections. It's a classic. And so at that point, I was in Chile presenting another book, which is called Chilean Movements. And the discussant was the vice president of the first constituents, the first committee to write the new constitution, which was very left-wing. And he was so depressed. He said, oh, it is all useless. Well, it is useless if you have a short-term perspective. Because in the end, there were many changes. And why do I insist so much that we should tame the initial enthusiasm? We have too much when we see facts going on so fast and so, oh, everything has changed. Well, precisely because then when the other part of the wave comes, when you see that things don't change so fast, when you see that things are not always going in the same direction, then we have to tame the pessimism of those who reduce the uprisings to a collective illusion of a minority part of the people. This is what's happened in Chile today. The fact they say, okay, all these big movements were just a minority, it was just important, it hasn't changed anything. The same people who were so enthusiastic are so pessimistic today. We need analysis. We need analysis instead. And we need to understand the more complex relationship between and what social change really means is never, ever linear. And the second point here, the second thesis is on the crisis. And I have to confess, I'm not very rational about that. I'm upset about the permanent use of crisis by sociologists, not only in social movements. Crisis are an explanation. And we quote a sociologist that are in the center where I was trained to reign, and we work with other people, we say Emanuele and Daniele, would never quote, but here's, I don't use it that much, but Luhmann. Luhmann wrote a very good text in 1984, where he basically says that to use the term of crisis is most of the time, he doesn't use the term, but intellectual laziness. I would definitely use it. He says, crisis is the way modernity sees itself. Modern people, they used to see themselves, to see society as a crisis. And so, of course, when I talked to my father, was a baker, we go to walk in the woods, and he explained me the world is really in crisis, everything is bad, everything is terrible. When I asked him, when was it good? When were we not in crisis? At least since I was born, people always told me we are in crisis. And certainly if you have a global perspective, yes, there will always be crisis somewhere, and many changes. But the problem is, one is a crisis. We need to conceptualize the world much better. But secondly is this hope that from the crisis something good will emerge, which actually is a Greek roots in Greek philosophy and definitely in Christianism. It's important. You have to die to resurrect. And Marxism, part of Marxism, you see it. You know that capitalism has to destroy itself so that we will reach the dictatorship of proletariat. Of course, it's not only that. I mean, this is something that you see in many places. So I wrote a few texts during the pandemic, and in the pandemic it was again very strong. I was, of course, very upset with this argument. So Zizek wrote that the pandemic was the beginning of communism, the end of capitalism. Many of my colleagues wrote that with the pandemic, the companies, the private companies would become fairer to the workers, would become greener, more comprehensive. Boaventura dos Santos, a sociologist I admire for many things, but he wrote, this is a real start of the 21st century. So it was a big event, and right 2 or 3 weeks after the beginning of the pandemic, they already wrote that this was a totally new world. Well, here we are today. Where is the end of capitalism? Where is the fairer, greener world? Of course not. Well, this is an article I wrote back then in 2020, also part of the book in Spanish. And we saw the same thing before. This is my previous book, Alter Globalization, that Emmanuel mentioned, with the financial crisis. You remember, I guess, better in Italy than other part of Europe, that at the beginning they all told us, which seems to be true, there's a problem of finance. Even Sarkozy, right-wing president of France, say, okay, that's the end of the ideology of dictatorship of the market, and the public powerlessness has died with the financial crisis. Public powerlessness we may discuss, but definitely the end of the dictatorship of markets is not over. And he said that, and 3 years afterwards they told us the idea that the crisis was actually because of public spending and public debt. Totally, it was not true, but this had an impact. So I'll come back to that. And so the conclusion in this book was that however broad and deep a crisis may be, it will not by itself generate social change. Social change depends on the capacity of social actors to highlight the issues raised by the historical situation and to advance alternative political visions and economic rationalities. Nothing very new here in Italy. I think you'll find some much better explanation in Gramsci. But for sure, there is no simple path from a crisis to a better, greener, and less unequal world. And this idea of salutary crisis is just misleading. I don't say that no change may come out of the crisis, but the change will come out of the crisis depends on the way, the capacity of actors to interpret the crisis in different ways. Well, Gramsci once again is here. And this will be my main argument today. This is a crucial space of agency. So, if I still believe, like following Anna Touraine, social movements produce society. Of course, in the book I nuanced it a bit. I would rather say social movements contribute to produce society, not the only actors. Still. Then, one way social movements produce society is providing alternative interpretation of the crisis of reality, and the struggle for interpretation is, I believe, crucial in the transformation of society. So, now to social movements after social change and the crisis. Do movements still have an impact? Broad question, of course, I cannot say no. Of course they have an impact. But I would still mitigate a bit, let's say, Touraine enthusiasm and progressive perspective, modern perspective. First, as I said, before this one, I already told you, social movements contribute to change society. They're not the only actors. Second, or the first point here, is that when you talk about social movements, of course, they're not only progressive movements, also reactionary movements and top-down movements or movement from above, as Lawrence Cox says, or other people. And here, I think that in social movement studies, as we are here also in activity co-organized by the fantastic research committee, 47 social movements, social classes, from the ISA, small theoretical points, I think we have been too blind to what happened on the other side, on the right wing. Not everyone. I mean, Gazapont, the book came much before the big wave of far-right movements and of the far-right taking power. But still, a few years ago, I was struck by one thing, is that I was looking for data from how Bolsonaro in Brazil came on power. How is it that in a country that was led by a progressive government, Lula, with very much improvement on higher education, clever people, and actually a good economy for a long time, many people getting out of poverty, hundreds of thousands of Brazilian people came out of poverty. Millions, actually, dozens of millions of them. And still, they vote at the end for the far right, after having a kind of impeachment, or maybe some talk about an institutional coup d'etat against Dilma Rousseff, the left-wing president. Well, I was struck with one thing, is the agency of far-right networks that was totally in open access, very easily accessible online. But sociologists didn't see it. Why? Because we were blind. It's actually easy access to information. In ultra-liberal think tanks, there was, I'll just take maybe some more time on that, a story in Brazil that I forgot the dates, but in the 2000s, the first decades, there was they founded in New York City, at the University of Columbia, Students for Freedom, global networks directly funded by neoliberal think tanks. Atlas Network is the name of this big foundation. Atlas Networks actually funds, directly inspired by von Hayek, a lot of funds. They give money to networks, think tanks all over the world. I'm sure there are 3 or 4 networks like that in Italy, but definitely they founded what they wanted to be a global network, Students for Freedom. Students for Freedom, a few years afterwards, I think it was in early 2010, they founded a chapter in Brazil, Belo Horizonte, a city a bit north of Rio de Janeiro. In Belo Horizonte, they founded this chapter called Students for Freedom in Portuguese, and they started to do trainings. They said in their website, on their website, no, it's not available anymore, that they did trainings between 2013 and 2016. 2016 is like the impeachment. In the between 2013 and 2015, they did trainings in 357 universities or institutions of higher education, basically all over Brazil. 357. They train youth leaders, basically providing training with this ultra-liberal ideology, saying that we don't need state, that if they are poor, it's their fault, that it's only well. So I wonder, who were the actors on the left, progressive side, able to go to 357 universities to provide that? No one. And you see how they train young people? And then they decided to create another movement called the movement Free Brazil, Movimento Brasil Libre. Why did they do that? They said it on the video that I watched. Not online anymore, but it used to be easy access online. They said, although the founder of the movements for Students for Freedom, 5 founders, 3 of them founded a new group called the Movement Free Brazil. They said explicitly, we founded new movements so that people cannot say we get funding from the US, because the other movement was fully funded from the US, and also they moved it. This movement was a key movement to organize right-wing protests all over Brazil. But then what I want to insist here is that there were very well-organized networks on the far right, and the sociologists were too long blind to that. It was well-organized, well-thought, and more efficient. And they also had this mass protest. I'll come back a bit to that. So, this was one point. The second point is that we have to see social movement below the tip of the iceberg. It's the main argument of my previous book, which is called Social Movement in the 21st Century, much more about organization. Too often, it's changed, I think. It is changing in the last maybe 10 years. But most people focus on protest, mass mobilization. This is important in social movement, but it's just the tip of the iceberg, such a small part. Activists in social movements do much more than that. They organize solidarity economy, they organize solidarity, they do so many things. They write, they read, they meet. I have a chapter on mutual aid during the pandemic. It was fantastic to see, for example, how from feminist movements, they organized, first they saw that there was also an epidemic of domestic violence. That's why first they hosted other women. They couldn't go anywhere during the pandemic, so it was just solidarity. But from there, they also started to write and to analyze it. And they basically, after a few months or years, they came up with a different perspective on public health, with a much more gender perspective in that. So this is part of the things, I think particularly solidarity economy, trainings, education is crucial in social movements. And we just focus on protest and on the impacts on politics. This is, I don't say it's not important, but it's just a small part of it. And one thing I really focus on is the way social movement transforms subjectivities and subjectivation. By subjectivation, I I think with Emanuele at least, we understand the production of yourself as an author of your life, the way you transform yourself with and you try to be consistent with some of your values. In many movements I've seen recently, the meaning of life, worldview, subjectivation, transformative personal, interpersonal encounters, and actually something I was totally blind to. New spiritualities are at the core of many social movements today. I'll just provide briefly 3 examples. Production of new subjectivities in what I used to call space of experience and all these square movements that we witnessed during 1 decade in the 2010s. But also I wrote with Carl Enriquez a book in Chile on Chilean movements, available online for free, but only in Spanish. But there's an article on that in English, actually, on the same topic. Something that we as sociologists have neglected too long, because it was micro, it was interpersonal, but it's a transformation of the relationship with the other and with oneself. In Chile, it was very strong. Why? Because Chile is a very neoliberal society where everyone is trained to be in competition with the other. So you see the other as, at the best, a competitor, at the worst, a robber, because it's a very individual society, competition and mistrust. In Latin America, but also all over the world, but particularly Latin America, you see the mistrust is rising. Mistrust with the state, with institutions, but also among people. And then you have suddenly a movement that brings people together, they talk together, and they feel a different relationship with each other, and they contest a series of values in Chile, including the importance of work and the way the country is organized. Now, in chapter here, and which also another article in English, I insist, and maybe this is more for Daniele, Andrea, and Emanuele as a theoretical discussion. Too often we say in social movement what people do is to assert themselves, to assert their own personality. You learn to talk in public. I remember in France, for example, Nuit debout, I studied that a lot. People said, okay, young people become more democratic, they will be active citizens because they learn to talk in public. When I did my social intervention focus groups, something like that, an interview with them, what they say was totally different. They say, I learned to limit myself, to listen to the other, to decide together. How do we do to, it's not about asserting yourself. And have another talk, actually, that I may have brought today. But too often we believe in a kind of neoliberal value of what subjectivity is about asserting yourself, your authentic self. You are something good inside, and you just have to be free of barrier to assert yourself, and everything is beautiful. Well, at that time, John Holloway used to be, I don't know how well known he is in Italy, but he had this book, How to Change the World Without Taking Power, and he insists that what is oppressed is part of ourselves, or subjectivity, or sexuality, or creativity is oppressed by the capitalist, patriarchal, and I don't know what society. Well, here as I say in the book and in different occasions, the problem is that it's too easy. We are not only on the, as individuals, we are not only on the oppressed part, we are also on the oppressive part. Capitalism, patriarchy, racism is, of course, I would say for the activists, but I would easily say it for myself. In me, I'm a white man trained in Europe, of course. I also reproduce this, the value I pretend to oppose. And I've seen too many, who haven't witnessed, very Marxist radical professors who actually act totally as very competitive individuals in their own department. So of course, I mean, it's a game. But I would like to insist here on the point of the transformation of oneself is a crucial part of social movements. Social movements they cross. Social movement cross individuals. We have the idea of a movement where you have these people against these people, and that's clear. No, social movement cross individuals. They are also inside of each individual. These are the subjectivation processes, transformation of yourself, which is not the affirmation of an authentic self that you means. So I think this is well, theoretical discussion here we may have afterwards, but a misleading point in terms of individualization of social movements. We have part of individualization, the use of social media, the fact that organization collective organization less important. It's part of individualization. But subjectivation is something different. It's not about asserting yourself. It's about transforming yourself. You have it here, and this is key in social movements. And when you focus too much or only on political impact, on the impacts on institutional policy, we miss that. I saw the same on in my previous book on alter-globalization, on community. In Italy, you know better than in many places of Europe, the Zapatista movements, maybe not for the youngest one, but I guess this was so important to my generation. And many people, including Turan, said, oh, wonderful. Indigenous people that affirm their authentic indigenous values. Many interesting to say. First, it was, if you read the Zapatista text, the first 2 years was just against capitalism. It was not a movement about only identities, a movement, anti-capitalist movements. So I'm very much about redistribution. This kind of new social movements idea by Turan really only works in a very Eurocentric perspective. Not even there. So it doesn't work. But what I would say here is that the idea that you affirm your own value against a world that is bad, this is just nonsense. Subcomandante Marcos said, the first Zapatista revolution was not when we took the arms against the Mexican state. It was 3 months before when we decided the equality of gender. So, women, you say the assertion of good Mayan indigenous values. Well, before Zapatista movements, women, in most communities, had to be married with 13, 14-year-old. They were beaten by their husband very regularly. There was massive problem of alcohol, and they didn't have any say in the community. These were the authentic, good Mayan community that people from outside see. So what the movement do first is transform yourself in terms of community or individual. And it's a mix between the value of a movement, equality, gender, anything, and yes, the cultural values. And I think for the Zapatista movement it was very clear, but also I would say that it's the same for individual actors. I have to hurry up a bit. So I'm still in this part, the main part actually here, I guess, on subjectivity and transformation. I have my favorite chapter and study is on religion movements in Brazil. Why? Because this is basically one of the points I was totally blind to. I didn't research on religion before. And I wrote an article that John Krinsky, that some of you may know, told me, oh, this is your best article. But I submitted it to 3 journals of social movements, and the reply was, oh, this is not about social movements, because I mentioned religion. So in Europe, if you say religion, sociology in Europe has become more secular than society, even more secular than society. So this was a problem. Now it's a bit different. But I would like to take a few things from liberation theology in Latin America. Liberation theology, we forgot about it, but it used to be very important in Latin America and in many parts of the world, including in Belgium. This was a movement of publication. Basically what I believe is that if you want to implement the gospel, you have to liberate people from oppression. Poor people are not poor because they are poor, they are made poor by the capitalist system. That's what they said. And so we need to help poor people to liberate themselves. Liberation theology in summary, of course. A long article about that in the book. So what they did is a series of popular education. They they taught people to read, to talk, to decide together. First, they discussed the gospel and to see what connection with life. But then it led to more horizontal relationship with the priests, including in the church, more pragmatism, and this contrasted. Then they said, we have to build social movements, but not Christian movements, not Catholic movements. They built the Workers' Party in Brazil, the Workers' Union in Brazil, Solidarity Economy, and many, many other things. Not that they did it as Christians. They say, my motivation is because of my faith. They have some good studies who show that. But they didn't mention Catholicism or Christ when they did social movements. They just did social movements for liberation. But what it produced is a very good book by Emir Sade in Portuguese about that. But he also called it New Social Movements in Sao Paulo. They produced a new culture of activism. It was much more horizontal, pragmatist, the vanguards. The communist vanguards still dominated Brazilian movements during the dictatorship. So they created a new culture of activism, a new culture of being part of society, and they trained people, they trained women to have a small business, to read, to become leaders, or just to be activists. So, As you know, thanks to your neighbors here, just over there, I think, the Vatican decided to break all that. Notably when Ratzinger came to Rome in 1984, and then 86, he wrote a sort of text against liberation theology, and it was immediately cut in Brazil. So meaning all the priests that were closer to this trend had to retire soon, they didn't have money, they closed many things and supported alternative trends in the church. So we're saying, okay, they lost. My response for other movement is that in spite of the fact that this movement was broken in 1980, these people transformed Brazil 20 years later. So, who are these people? Lula, he was a workers' migrant family, came to Sao Paulo. He was trained in these communities. It's called pastoral, anyway, in these liberation theology movements. Dilma Rousseff, but not only them, the founder of the farmers' movements, the founder of the union, most of the founder of the Workers' Party, the World Social Forum, Solidarity Economy. All this would not exist in Brazil without the training provided by, in this case, religious movements, and by this training, but also the organizing, everything. What is so strong here for me is that even after it was broken as a movement, they still produced an impact, which you may see as an optimistic perspective. When social movements train actors, it means that they may have an impact on a long term. But today, this is exactly what the far right, very neoliberal religious movement do in Brazil. Neo-Pentecostal movement do exactly the same. They train people, provide a different setting, they teach to poor people how to write, to read, and all that. And so religious movements, they manage to have a much longer term impact than several other movements because they train people that way. And this is particularly true today on the far right. So, spend too much time on that. Chile, I already mentioned a bit, but when we see a movement like in Chile, of course, you may see what impact they have on the presidency, which is important. I would say that more importantly, these movements in Chile has questioned what it means to be Chilean in the 21st century. Chile is a society that, as you may know, came out of the dictatorship in 1988. And afterwards, basically the Chilean identity was to say, we are not a dictatorship anymore, and we are doing better than other Latin American countries because we work a lot and we are very neoliberal. And Chile is an island, oasis, as I say, an oasis. Well, the movement came on and said, okay, it's maybe an oasis for the rich people, but we work all the time, we don't have money. It's a country run by economic elite, and especially one thing I love very much in Latin America, but not only in Chile. People still in 2010s, students in the secondary school, they were told that their country, Chile, was a white people country. That in Bolivia they may have some indigenous people, but in Chile there were no indigenous left, just a few, that's it. And you saw it in the surveys. Very few people identify as indigenous. And then with these movements, the main banner was actually the indigenous banner, the banner of the indigenous community in Chile. And it has an impact, it transformed the image of the country. All of a sudden, they realize that Chile is a country with an important minority of Mapuche, notably, and indigenous communities. So the way a movement can transform the identity of a country is very impressive, and it was very fast. And you see it in the last census, that many, today it's about 14% of Chilean people who acknowledge that they are actually from indigenous origin or indigenous people. That's not the case 10 years ago. So they transform very fast the identity. What does it mean to be a Chilean in the 21st century? Which leads me to my final points. This is what social movements do. But my main argument I would say today is that this is what we mostly focus on when we study social movements, but we miss the third half of the game. I don't know how it is the name in Italian, but in Belgium particularly, I guess, what we love in football is mostly the third time. It is the same, yes. Yes, so I think that this is a very important part of the game. And my argument would be that this is a crucial part of social movements. Social movements on the streets, but then there's a third time, when actors are not playing anymore. This is when there is a very important, crucial battle on interpretation. And when we study social movements, we miss that. We don't study that. Two cases here. Brazil. I was there with my good friend Bernard Bringel. He invited me as a visiting professor in Brazil in 2013. Millions of Brazilians in the streets, on the streets. I was there, I interviewed people. I can tell you, this was a very progressive movement. They asked more public services, more buses, better schools. There were more state. Let's say, in summary, on the left of the government led by the Workers' Party, Dilma Rousseff and Lula. At the left. 2 years later, and we wrote an article about that with Breno, 2 years later, this very same movement was presented as a movement against the Workers' Party and a right-wing movement. I told you, they went to 357 schools, notably high schools, to train people, and did in all the media. So the same movement was presented as a right-wing movement against the left-wing government. It was, let's say, against the left-wing government, but wanted more progressive policy. They frame it as something totally different. And this interpretation of the movement had more impact on Brazilian politics than the movement itself. After that, there was actually a far-right movement, massive far-right movement. They did an impeachment. There were many transformations there. I don't think they are the point, but the way they managed to reframe, to reinterpret the movements, and it was not true, but it doesn't matter. We know in sociology since 1927 that even a false idea may have a real impact. So they reinterpreted the movement and had a huge impact in the transformation of Brazil afterwards, and including this led the way with many different steps, including religious movements, to the rise of Bolsonaro. We see exactly the same in Chile. I just told you, Chile has been deeply shaken. It's a shaken society. Identity of Chilean people has been questioned, challenged by the movements, which is what the movements are about, to raise big issues. Big question, including on what does it mean to be Chilean in the 21st century. Of course, when society is shaken, when there is uncertainty, when people feel less comfortable, that's a good moment also for the return of the reactionaries. And the battle for the interpretation of the uprising of 2019 is crucial in Chile today. And it starts right in the movements. So you see below there, the picture. Every evening in Santiago, in all the city of Chile during 5 years, there were graffitis in all the city center. The movement expressed itself on the walls. In the evenings, there were young people from the far right. They came and on the graffitis they wrote things like "Thank you very much to the police," "Long live to the 1973," which is long live to dictatorship, basically. There was an interpretation about many things already there on the walls, but then what happened is that there was a battle on what was the meaning of these movements. So, of course, what we always see is that in 2019, there was obviously a massive movement in Chile, the widest movement the country ever experienced. Then, after the pandemic, maybe 2022, 2023, it was framed as a minority movement, a few people. There were only vandals because it destroyed many things. There was a movement. So, for example, even including with social scientists, politologists, and some socialists too. I was in a congress in Chile, and everyone had to present, when they talked about these movements, they say, okay, there was a movement on the right, but there were also left-wing or progressive people protesting, but also right-wing. And there were actually few right-wing, but like maybe 50 people on the right making a small protest in a rich neighborhood, and there were millions of people in the streets. But afterwards, you have to frame it as there were two camps, which was actually, once again, not true. But then, in Chile, a bit like what I told you in Brazil, what's incredible, the capacity of the right, and mostly far right, is still with direct legacy from the dictatorship, to make popular education, studies on the far right, from the far right. They study movements, they study Boaventura Santos, they provide classes on that. and Carla, my partner, attend the classes where they teach you Marx quite well. We went to Los Santos, and all the progressive authors, they study it, but also they provide different interpretation of the protest movements. And today in Chile, many people believe that this movement was a failure because it didn't transform everything, and they believe it was also a left-wing and right-wing movement, which is not true. So my point here and that's my last slide, Emanuele. It's okay, I'm always a bit too long. But as I said, that as social movement scholar, I think we have to see this third time, the time of interpretation as a crucial moment in producing interpretation, but also in producing a transformation in society. It's we do it partly, but this is also what is complex is that we are definitely part of that. It's not like there's a public debate and we as sociologists analyzing it. While we analyze a movement, this is part of this debate. So I came up, as I told you, with this book. No, the previous one. That one, Chile in Movement. And this book, basically, we have 16 Chilean authors who show how the movement has a long-term impact on, for example, transformation of the Mapuche identity in Chile, the impact on women, a series of impacts that you cannot see. Of course, they didn't change the constitution, but there are many small impacts in the movement, long-term impact in the movements. So we show it, and we presented it in 16, many universities in Chile, and notably with the former vice president of the Constituent Assembly. And he was so depressed, saying, okay, what I did was just over. And then he changed his perspective, and today he's a candidate for the next elections. I don't say just because of this book, but I mean, just taking as an example as the work we produce is immediately taken also in some part of these debates. So we have to analyze it, knowing that we are part of this debate. Actors are producers of knowledge, everyone agrees on that now, but it's a long tradition now in social movement studies, mostly, notably in Latin America. And researchers are actors in the battle of interpretation. Not the only actors, of course not. But in this battle of interpretation, we are mobilized by actors and we produce it too. So how do we analyze ourselves in this part that we have to analyze? And well, to conclude, we take my first argument. We have to qualify, we have to tame the enthusiasm of those who announce a radical change in society as soon as a movement arises. Changes is never linear. It doesn't go so fast and never in the same direction. It's not a straight line. But we have to do it also because we have to tame, to qualify the pessimism of those who reduce the uprisings to a collective illusion of a minority of people. And especially today, when we see that everything is going to the other direction, well, I would say first, we have to underline the importance of the success of social movements and actors on the far right side, for sure. But we also have to know that this has always been the case, that social movements go through many different steps. And still, of course, I told you, and I do believe that we have to be enthusiastic, we have to defend democracy, this is part of sociology. At the same time, we should avoid to confuse desires for a just society with historical needs. The urgent need for a more just social and ecological world is not a sufficient argument for it to happen. And too often, I'm a bit upset with some interpretation. The pandemic was very clear. They say, okay, the world needs to become greener. We need, and today we see it every day. I mean, you see every day that climate change is obvious in everyday way for everyone's life. And so people say, so things will have to change. We believe that because the crisis is so strong, we will have to change. Well, at the same time, you can have a Trump who negates climate change and goes on. So this is why interpretation is really crucial here. Even if when you have an objective crisis, this is not what brings changes. What brings change is the way actors interpret this crisis. And it's not about objectivity of the crisis. It's not, maybe not objectivity of this crisis. It's the way actors interpret it, of course, from the progressive side, from the reactionary side. And as researchers, I think we have to be careful not to confuse our desire or the fact that most of us, if not all of us, want to see a greener, fairer, better society. But this is not a reason for it to happen. It's not because people are always, people's lives become impossible, always more difficult. This is not why. there's no reason why it may change. And I will end here. Thank you.
Thanks to the Professor Jeffrey Pleyers for his great and inspiring analysis. I invite you also to go in depth in this analysis, reading his numerous different books and articles. And thanks to Università Marconi to organize this event, to the professor and friend Emanuele Toscano for the long-term collaboration with me, with the Fondazione Di Vittorio, and also for his role as a supervisor in my thesis. And thanks to both, because with your works you build a relation in the scientific community and with the social movement, and this is basic to improve our capacity to interpret the world and to act in the world. It is easy to be the discussant of the Professor Jeffrey Pleyers because he favored the discussion in the International Sociological Association, and also, as you listen now, in the way how he presents, he go to the K concept, to present the K concept, and so to share a common framework for a discussion. As a discussant, I will focus some key points of this speech and this analysis, and then I will do 2 questions. As you listened, Professor Jeffrey Pleyers gave us theoretical and also methodological tools to analyze the present age and to discuss about this and to consider the different discussions about the interpretation of our world. So from a theoretical point of view, he presents a sociology of complexity in a certain way. And from a methodological point of view, he focused attention on the relations between the actors, on the concept of empathy, in the book is well focused. That means the ability to listen the other. So, Professor Jeffrey Pleyers helped us to challenge our analytical interpretative system, and he do something that is relevant in sociology. He go to present and analyze in depth the concept that he used. He used in the analysis, and he transformed also by the analysis. And so, by this interpretation, he helped us to cross, to use the term that it's really inspiring, to cross ourselves, to cross our interpretation of the world, help us to confront each other. So it's easy, no, to be the discussant of this way to study. He studies, he deals with the fundamental questions of the history of the general sociology, and so the K concept, no? Social science, social actor, collective life, history, politics, social movement. And on the other side, it brings the sociology in the present age. This point of view helps us to better understand some K concept and also some K dichotomies inside this concept, like the relation between progress and linearity and limits, the local and the global, the connection also between religion and spirituality, and the social action for the emancipation. as well as, it's clear in the book, the relation between formal and informal processes, between social action and parties, and so on. So the thought of the Professor Jeffrey Pleyers is not linear in the meaning that it is open to the dialogue and to consider different points of views. I want to stress this point because it is relevant for a scientific community to focus and to understand and to go in depth the way how we build our discussion, the way how we build our interpretation. Me, Emanuele Toscano, and Geoffrey Pleyers studied in depth the sociology of action and of the subject. We had many discussions about the theory of our great master, Professor Alain Touraine and Michel Vieux-Urquin, and we tried to adopt the concept, but also to discuss about this concept, to criticize this concept. I think also to the sociological intervention, to the methodology, but also to the concept of subject that you presented in a certain view, in a renewal way to focus the attention. So by this speech, by also the books, Professor Jeffrey Pleyers show us the relevance to adopt a theory and the following methodology, but at the same time to not idealize our theory, to open our theory to discussion. Now, as discussant, I go towards some key questions, and I want to go directly to some big questions that are, for me, from my point of view, big questions in the contemporary sociology. And also to help Geoffrey Pleyers to go in depth in the presentation of some key concepts that are really relevant. Professor Geoffrey Pleyers said the change is not linear. So, if the change is not linear, what modernity means? What are the universal and fundamental rights? You affirmed, Geoffrey, that we need to build a global sociology that is not an occidental sociology, the last bull. And at the same time, we need to build a global consciousness. In the present age, some universal and global values are in crisis. I think to the protection of the environment, peace, dignity, solidarity. So how we can affirm these global values and at the same time how we can give space to all the different cultural interpretation of these values. What does it mean to build universal values in an age of not linear change? So, considering the point of view of the subject, the point of view of the actors. To quote your book, how la lucha politica e epistemica, because so it is also an interpretative struggle, can be based on intercultural dialogue. So this is the first big theoretical question that is, from a point of view, strictly linked to your interpretative system. The second question is related to the role of the public sociology, or better, as you explained yesterday in the lesson with the Professor Roberto Cipriani, the public sociology, or better, the sociology, because sociology always have a public role. So, what is the role of the public sociology? I think also to your role, no, as president of the International Sociological Association, but in general also to the role of action research, as me, Emanuele Toscano, tried to propose with some analysis and also research and to spread. So what is the public role of the sociology based on the dialogue? What do you think that we can do together in the International Sociological Association and at the national, local, global level as a sociologist to be engaged, to give a contribution to the public space and to the problem, the most critical problem of problems of our age. So these are two main questions. And also, before to give you the space to this answer, I want to have a first round to ask you, to the audience, se avete delle domande da porre al professore in questa lezione.
Se non c'è...
Okay. Hi, Geoffrey. Thank you very much for being here, everyone. Now, the first thing is like about the social movement as constitutive actor of modernity of our age, and I completely agree on you, as well as on the global dimension of social movements, because sometimes we tend to consider social movement as part of the national context or just where they rise. But if we consider, for example, not only Arab Spring or the Indignados or no global, alter global movement on the, let's say, progressist new social movement side, but also on the far right, and we're observing it on a daily basis. We are witnessing the global rise of the far right social movement. And all these elements bring us to think that social movement has not only limited impact on a temporal dimension, but do not have a limited impact also on a spatial dimension. And how do you feel like, what can we do as sociologists to also overcome the the national roots or the limits of the methodology we use or the perspective we use to overcome this problem, is in specifically in analyzing specific expression of general phenomenon or general social movement, and to collect them, bringing them as in the framework of global social movement as global sociologist.
May I pose two questions? Thank you, of course, Geoffrey, for your very inspiring presentation. I have some questions and reflection, general reflection about what you said. The first question is about, we already spoke about this in Rabat in the last forum of the ISA, is about the concept of temporality. As you know, as RC47, we had a huge success around this concept. We organized two very big sessions about the role of temporality and social movements. Do you think that what you said about the positive approach and the pessimistic approach of the analysis is also related with the different temporalities that social researchers has differently from the social actors? This means social analysts used to accelerate these kind of temporalities and gives a different temporality in the interpretation of this movement, more than the movement in itself. The second question is about what you said about the third time. When you present this concept, it came to my mind the idea of the period of latency of Melucci in the analysis of social movements. So, I mean, if you can go more in depth about this aspect, would be great. And the last is not a question, it's more a consideration. I really thank you about the role, I mean, that you underlined of the religious movements. If we think about the alter global movements in Italy during the beginning of this century, in my thesis, I really underline the importance and the success of this movement that is linked with the role played, for instance, by the Rete Lilliput, that has been a huge network of Catholic groups managed and found a way to collaborate, to co-create a way of doing and being a movement in Italy with the more radical part of the previous movement in itself, that are the social centers. So my idea has been, when I analyze this movement, that the success of the movement in Italy has been mainly focused on this convergence between the more radical components of the social movements in Italy, such as social centers, centri sociali, and the Catholic part of the movement. The Rete Lilliput is one of the actors, maybe the most famous one, but at international level, we have seen the capacity of, for instance, in England, to put together a very formal association like Oxfam with very radical, or the nuclear for the CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, that has have very religious touch with the most radical part and components of the society in England, for instance, Reclaim the Streets and so on. So that's my 2 cents of the discussion. Tu veux qu'on va collecter? Non, ça dépend de toi. Si tu veux, on peut collecter des autres questions. Ok.
Grazie. Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. And my question regards I'm not an expert of the literature on social movements, but the lecture was interesting, and you showed us that you studied social movements in South America across time, and so I was wondering, like, how do you theorize time? Like, for instance, I use some concepts that are more typical of political science, like critical junctures, path dependency, and I was wondering if there is like a literature in social movements that deals with the concept of like how social movements change across time. And that's my question. Thank you.
So maybe you can answer.
Yes. Thank you. This is actually a very good contribution, not only question, so thank you for that. Thank you, Daniele, for a very kind comment. And 2 tough questions that I cannot, there's no clear reply to that. What does modernity means if change is not linear? Well, I would say that first, I don't believe, but it's another debate, I don't believe we are in modernity anymore. We are much more in a global age, and that the limits of the planets are incompatible with modernity. So we still live in that period, but one of the roles of sociology is to contribute to global consciousness. I believe in that. The fact that today we are in a period of increasing interdependency. Of course, Donald Trump says the opposite and managed to build policies on the opposite way, but no one can stop the increasing interdependency. We may have less international trade, for sure, but the global warming will not stop, and of course we see all the information circulates, and we see how this global far right, the global authoritarian regimes, the connection between authoritarian regimes are always more clearer. Anyway, so this is part of the 2 questions about modernity, but also about the global consciousness. Now, how epistemic struggle can be based on intellectual dialogue. Actually, this is the talk I gave yesterday, hopefully it's in an article, is that once we open ourselves to a dialogue with sociologists and social scientists and actors from different continents, then the epistemic struggle is obvious, because they have different ways of considering science, society, and social sciences sometimes. And especially what has changed a lot in social movement studies is the relationship with the actors. When we were doing a PhD, our director only said, you have to take distance. You have to be far away from the actors. Don't say the same. Of course, we should not say the same of the actors. We analyze. But you could, it was just prohibited to be too close to the actors. Today, you say you have to situate yourself, you explain your relationship, but if you are activist, it doesn't prevent you to do a good analysis. You just have to explain it. And of course, I say at the same time, I would like to also to defend sociologists that take more distance. It's also very fine. Even would like to have more right-wing sociologists in my association, for sure. There used to be very good right-wing sociologists, not far right-wing. We don't have that many anymore. That's a pity. But again, I mean, my point was to say that from the Global South, they had all this perspective on the actor reflexivity and self-analysis, notably with False Border in Colombia, Fei Chiaitong in China in the 1930s already. What creates the Chinese sociology as a proper sociology was precisely the idea of taking the knowledge of the subjects in that time, the peasants in rural China, seriously. Not to explain this situation only with economy or foreign powers, no, to take their knowledge in consideration and to build our own analysis as sociologists. This is what Fei Chiaitong did in China in the 1930s, and we saw it then in False Border in Colombia in the 1970s. And then, of course, we see that something new in social movements today, in social movement studies today, because now it's in the West. It's not new. I mean, this is kind of epistemic struggle that travel actually, and we likewise if you, as I said yesterday, we open sociology much more today than 30 years ago to the feminist approach. This has transformed our methodology. You cannot do research in the same way today. That's very good, and I think that this relationship with the actors, notably with more empathy, doesn't mean that you agree with them, but just to take them seriously. You don't judge when you interview. This has transformed our perspective, improved our methodology, and we're actually much more rigorous, I think, when you have to state your positionality, when you have to, when you take the actor more seriously. I think, well, the contribution by feminist scholars have been crucial in that. In terms of what is the role of sociology in this world, and public sociology or just sociology, always complex, of course, but one is that, we may discuss it, but I have the conviction that really, I'll maybe answer to that at the end, because a few months ago I wrote a text called A Time for Sociology, and you may have heard about it, some of you signed it, and then I just kept it and presented it at the beginning of the World Forum of Sociology in Rabat. And I think that, well, all the texts about that, about sociology today, what the state of sociology is complex, but I would say that today is a fantastic time to be a sociologist. Sociology is a fantastic discipline. We have been able to innovate, to revisit our discipline more than in any time of history, probably, in the past 25 years. At the same time, sociology is attacked everywhere, and so is attacked by, of course, by authoritarian regimes. We just have to state, even stating some of the basic, the rigor, facts are important. And this is something that we have to defend. That there are solid research that draw from qualitative, quantitative solid research have to be defended today. Because it's not just research in sociology, just not one opinion. And as even Merkel said, that to have decision based on science and on facts is a key part of democracy. Of course, sociology is part of that. So I'll try to show it online afterwards. But if you haven't read it, please not only read, but if possible, sign the manifesto, the declaration of the ISA now, called A Time for Sociology, online and kindly translated by Emanuele in Italian. I heard that it may be, but it's on the Italian Sociology Association website. Hopefully soon in the journal. I think it will be published in the journal. So I think this is where I try to put the way I see the role of sociology. and the challenges. Andrea, as always, very good questions, stuff, of course. Right, the global dimension of movements. I have a chapter on that in the book, but I develop it more elsewhere. The problem is to consider national and global as two separate dimensions. So we have there is a very good actually issue of the French Journal of Political Science. Oh, sorry, French sociologists, French political scientists. You know, French is a strange country, but weird country. So they do like the national, always. Everything is national in France. So they wrote a very good, very insightful, top level issue of French Journal of Political Science. Their argument was that there were no Arab revolution. That it was different in each country because there was specific dynamic there. And true, there was specific national dynamic, and Tunisia was not the same as Egypt, was not the same as Morocco, of course. But I don't see how this makes an argument that this is not also regional and global. The movements, it is not because we say this movement is national, it is not global. It's just a different way of seeing it and of seeing its kind of impact. And of course, one thing is, which is not at all a paradox, and I think Emanuele already showed it a long time ago, that far-right movements, they say they want to be more national, but at the same time they are very global. And you cannot understand movement, for example. You see how messages, especially from the religious far-right, transit, circulate from Latin America, from the US to Latin America, and then transform in Latin America, and then to East Europe. Of course it's global. And it's a global perspective. Of course, reaffirmation of modernity, patriarchy, and all that, it's definitely very global. So what can we do as sociologists to overcome the national roots? This is also, I think, I will just mention two things, and they are part of two articles published in, one in Global Dialogue, another one is in Journal Globalizations in English, and both in the book in Spanish. First, methodological nationalism. We are still rooted in methodological nationalism. We have to overcome that. But the condition is also to avoid methodological globalism. What is, for me, in my case, methodological globalism is first Eurocentrism, to believe that everything that universal is Western centrism, Eurocentric. It's also the fact that the global sociology at that time, especially 1990s, 20s, when it was global, it was mostly addressed to international institutions, and it neglected the local, national, and the actors. Global sociology was something that was done for the FAO here in Rome, that was done for an international institution, and not so much in contact with different contexts. It was knowledge extractivism from the actors. So this is different. So we have to, I wish to have more global sociology, we have to resist methodological globalism. Especially take again the example of Zapatista that you know very well, Andrea. Zapatista movement, they produced globality from small villages far, far away in Mexico. They produced globality. So the global is not only produced by global actors or intellectuals, it's also produced by local actors. So that's the first thing, against methodological globalism and of course methodological nationalism. The second thing is that a global dialogue is crucial, and to overcome national roots, too much focus on national. It is important on national level, but not the only level. I think for me, this was my another text translated, I think, by Emanuele too. That was published in an editorial of the Italian Journal of Sociology. Global sociology is also a state of mind and a personal orientation. Is to be open to the other, to have a dialogue with other people, and to see if I read some colleagues from Latin America or now from China. Of course, I don't agree with everything, but instead of saying, okay, this is different, not good quality sociology because they don't quote all the authors, it's just to see what can I learn? How does it challenge my sociology? How does it transform the concepts? And likewise, mostly in the book in Spanish, actually, but also in an article in English, I insist on the dialogue with researchers from different countries. Why do I publish my book in Spanish? I regret not to have it in English. But first, it should be in Spanish because I study Latin America. So my main discussion is with my colleagues and actors in Latin America. It's not like, and I defend, hopefully also another article almost ready, but I have to publish it before the end of my time at the ISA. I would like to have more sociologists to publish the same article in different languages. Not exactly the same. Every time you translate, you have to adapt to a different audience. So if I write in Spanish, I don't have to explain too many things on, I don't know, Boaventura dos Santos and all that. If I write in English, I have to include much more context on the countries and, of course, to insert it in the intellectual dialogue of a country. So it's not about translating words, but we have to defend a multilingual sociology. We have to, this idea that is, you know, some people used to say, it's plagiarism. Plagiarism when you publish your same article in Italian and in English. This is bullshit. The article, you don't write it just to have points. You write it to talk to people, to spread your questions, your analysis. So of course you need to have it in your own language and language of the actors. The priority is to publish our research in the language of the actors and the colleagues who, the community there. Then, of course, we have to publish in English. So I go to Latin America. Of course, I speak in Spanish and I understand Portuguese. And I publish in Spanish mostly, open access. But I go there and I try to convince my colleagues they should speak in bad English, in Globish, but because we need to read them. And some of them, a bit activists, indigenous sociologists, they say, no, I don't care. I don't want to be read by you. I don't need to be read by it. I don't need to be read by you. What matters to me is Spanish. I say, no, you may not read it, but we need it. We need to learn from you and from your perspective. So please, write more in English. At the same time, I also say, we need first to save space in Spanish, for sure. And I'm struck by the fact that this is exactly the same discussion I have in Chile, in Japan, in many countries. We need to, and one of my problems is what they do in the name of international or global sociology. In all these countries, they explain, they tell me, there are international standards we cannot escape. So we need to have a long list of articles we produce. Scopus, I didn't know what Scopus was, but I discovered it in Chile. You use Scopus, I don't know. In Italy, in Belgium, we don't care about Scopus. We don't have it. We are not evaluated like that. But, I mean, and they say, we have to do it because this is international standards. In Japan, they say, well, young people today, if they write in Japanese, they lose the time because it doesn't go to the index, I don't know what. This is international standards. They say, we don't want it, but we have to do it. It is not true. I say it is international too. These kind of standards are set by sociologists in their own country. I talked to Chile, I talked to people in the Ministry of Research and Higher Education. They tell me, no, as I told you, it's a left-wing president, left-wing government. They tell me, you know, we don't really agree with this standard, but the researchers want to impose more objective and international evaluations. This is why they are standards. So the ministers, they say, this is because researchers want to do that. Researchers say this is international standard and the ministry. Actually, we, as scholars, we produce our own standards in international research. And there's no reason why this is more international, to publish in English is not more international than multilingual. Then we have to analyze it a bit better and bring intersectionality and especially class in that. Well, why is it so important in many countries to publish in English? Because in these countries, there are private secondary schools especially, where people there speak a perfect English when they are 18 and easily publish in English. While the other sociologists that come from different backgrounds and don't have so much money, their father don't have so much money, they don't speak this good English. You know why? I was the president of the World Forum Sociology in 2021. It was to take place in Brazil, Porto Alegre. And of course, for me it was obvious that Portuguese should be one of the languages. Why wasn't it not? Because the two delegates from Brazil opposed. The only one who opposed were the two Brazilians. So I, as a European, I could not say, okay, I want to have Portuguese because it would be like European imposition. But they say, no, it's only English. A class issue among sociologists. So we have to analyze that. And global is, but it's also beyond the community of sociologists. Global is also what we do by it. We also produce globality. And by contesting this kind of the monopolistic approach of English and this English sociology, we also produce a different globality, and it is an important struggle. So it's not about social movement, and we have social movements, of course, or changes in university too. Well, I was a bit long on that, but I'm a bit passionate about this point, as you can hear. Temporality. By the way, I was very pleased to be part of the first panel of RC47 there, and I still haven't sent my text. I have to do that. Temporality and social change. My point was that I had 2 points in this talk. First, the temporality of social change does not correspond to the temporality of activism, politics, and research in accelerated modernity. One problem today is that everything is accelerated and everyone wants to see the result immediately. Activists, some part, not all, but some get tired because they don't see change after 1 year, after 1 month, after 1 week. The worst case is researchers. We want to see the change immediately, and even one of us at least published this book. Chile has changed the change of the model when the movement is still going on. So we want to see movement changing society in the time we write an article. It doesn't work like that. So I think we are part of this accelerated modernity. We publish far too many articles far too fast. And well, this is part of temporality. Social changes always take time. And the way we evaluate social movements depends very much. If you focus on the political impact, then the next election may be part of relevant. But I always take the case of, sorry, I will repeat myself once more, Emanuele, 1968 in France. I said it yesterday too. But still, May 1968, you all know about that. June 1968, the largest electoral victory of the right in France. So if you analyze May 1968, just after the election, or let's say September 1968, say, okay, useless movement, minority of people, the right is in power. Today, who cares about June 68? No impact, no long-term impact. And May 1968 changed the world, or changed France. Well, no. French people believe May 1968 changed the world, because it changed France. So for them, it's a world. And so, I mean, this is long-term impact, which brings me to latency. I had a slide on a small slide on latency. I have one of the articles I would like to finish one day, maybe after I say this one, is latency. I think Melucci and Vera Taylor, they're good because they shed light on this stage, but we have to make one more step. The problem is latency and Taylor is abeyance. Latency and abeyance, when you read the definition, Melucci, Taylor, they still focus on the eventful part of the protest. So they say latency is very important because they prepare resources that will be useful for the next protest. This is wrong. Latency is important because it is important as such. Because that's the time where actors are produced. That's the time when they do popular education. That's the time when they do real economic projects, the economy and other things. That's the time when they read, when they transform their subjectivities. That's the time when they meet their colleagues in different ways, when they have this socialization. That's the time they actually produce political actors. That's the time they do so many things. It is latency and or abeyance. Taylor defined it as holding process through which movements endure unfavorable political climates and preserve continuity between waves of protest. It's not about preserving continuity, it is the movement itself. So this is one of the strong points I defended in a previous book, but I didn't really write it theoretically. And finally, yes, different temporalities and communities, religious movements, social movements actually, as trends of ideas, brings us to much more long-term social change. And there was a question I missed from Daniele, I think, about, I don't know from who, but modernity. What about modernity in a time when change is not linear? Well, change has never been linear. We see history of a rising history of workers' movements, but come on, it was not like that. There was already very strong defeat, and then we are still in a welfare state. So modernity has always been like that, and I think that this is always the one thing in my talk today and in the book is that there's always a gap or temporalities, different temporalities between analysis and what happens. So of course, on a long-term perspective, you may see more continuity, but there are always setbacks. This is how it works, and it's not. So one of the questions is always, what is our role as analysts, as sociologists, to produce this kind of continuity. It's part of our role to say we have a long-term analysis. In a long time, you see that, of course, you see development of welfare state, you see a thing like that. But actually, our role is also to show that it was much more complex. It's about, yes, temporality is a good term for, but the temporality of analysis is maybe more the problem than the temporality of social movements.
Grazie professor Geoffrey Pleyers. Siamo nei tempi previsti per la discussione. Se ci sono altre domande, sono sicuro che il professor Geoffrey è assolutamente disponibile a impegnarsi un po' più di tempo, quindi se ci sono, no? Quindi possiamo chiudere. Ringrazio ancora una volta l'Università Morconi per aver organizzato questo, Manuele Toscano e il professor Geoffrey Pleyer per la disponibilità a questa discussione. Ci vediamo nei prossimi appuntamenti dell'Università, della Fondazione Di Vittorio e dell'Associazione Mondiale di Sociologia.
Prima di andare via, volevo fare riferimento fatto a Rabat in Messico.